I have to repeat now because I just learned this. Kalispera kayis ke kri. So at least something I can speak in your language, and then we have to change into English. I'm going to talk about the new anticonvulsive drug, which I learned is not released in your country. It's called perampanel. It's an AMPA receptor antagonist, and I will talk about the key position, or what kind of position it could have in epilepsy therapy. I will give some words on some principles, pharmacokinetics, a few words, the study data showing you how the efficacy is, and then I give 3 slides on the Bonn experience. We have quite a lot of patients on here. Now let's start with my disclosure. We participated in the phase 3 studies on perampanel. I received speaker and advisory board honoria from Eisai, who is the company who produces the drug, and I get an honorarium for this talk, which is compared to our ministers very small. So this does, of course, not influence my opinion. So let's just look at the Nmda receptor, or the glutamate, which is one of the big transmitters, excitatory transmitters in the CNS, and it's transmitted via 3 receptors, AMPA, NMDA, and carnitine receptor. And from this, the ionotropic receptors show a fast excitatory activity in the brain. AMPA, NMDA, and carnitine, this is the word for the abbreviations here. And if you look more closely at this too, the AMPA receptor transmits the rapid effect of the EPSP, which is very fast here, and the slow part is transmitted by the NMDA receptor. All tries to influence the NMDA receptor did not give good results because the influence on the memory is rather high, but the AMPA receptor seems to be rather independent from memory performance, and in addition gives the fast rise in the IPSP here. Now again, you have a closed state and an open state, and sodium ions go in there and a few calcium ions as well, and there's here this glutamate binding site, and you have another one, a non-competitive binding site on the side of the receptor, and this here is the competitive binding site, and the non-competitive binding site is used by perampanel. The competitive is used by a substance called BGG492, which is developed by Novartis in the moment and is in phase 3 studies. I'm talking only about the perampanel. So summarizing what I said just now, inhibiting the AMPA receptor in experimental epilepsy has quite a good rational basis. In human epilepsy, blocking this as a therapeutic principle is a new principle, so it's a totally new kind of drug. It seems that the AMPA receptor is not involved in memory processing, so we don't expect any negative effects on memory. Since beside sodium, calcium influx can be reduced, there's even a speculation that this could have a disease-modifying effect, whatever this is. Now, the pharmacokinetics are quite nicely for a drug now coming as an add-on drug to other drugs. You see here very, very long half-life. This steady state takes about 14 days in healthy volunteers, and the average half-life finally is 105 hours. This has 2 big advantages for the patient. Firstly, there's once daily dosing possible, and secondly, if they miss 1 tablet, this doesn't probably make much difference for them, and they just go in their schedule taking the other drugs. So this is one of the pharmacokinetic positive sides of perampanel. Now, there were 3 phase 3 studies, and they were done in patients 12 years and older and above, and had more than 5 or more partial onset seizures in a 6-week period. This is similar to all the drugs in the testings up to now. And they were enrolled, and they failed, and this was tried to get very early patients who were thought to be pharmacoresistant to 2 or more anti-epileptic treatment drugs, currently taking 1 to 3 anti-epileptic drugs. These are the 3 studies. You see here the dosing, very low dosing, 2 milligram, 4 milligram, 8 milligram, Europe, Asia, Australia. Here 8 and 12, and here 8 and 12 again. Here I just want to mention that this is Central America and South America who participated in these drugs. And finally, it came out that the highest dose used was 12 milligram, and altogether 1,218 patients were in these studies. Now, these are the concomitant anti-epileptic drugs taken. There's not really a difference. They are all similar with these often used drugs, so I don't have to go into detail, and there's not really a difference between the different dosings here. Now, one of the aspects here, and sometimes explaining a lot of side effects, is the titration. I will show you later on that the enzyme-inducing drugs allow a faster titration. This titration is, from our clinical experience, rather fast. So titration up was done per week by 2 milligrams, even up to 12 milligrams, and this with 8 milligrams, this is done in 4 weeks. This seems to be quite okay in the case when an enzyme inducer is in the background, but otherwise it's a rather fast titration here. Now, the primary endpoints to establish the minimum, The primary endpoints was to establish a minimum effective dose of perampanel, and the secondary, safety and tolerability of perampanel. And these were the primary endpoints of the study, or the objective were these are primary endpoints. The FDA always wants a median change in seizure frequency within 28 days, and the EMA, the European authorities, want a responder rate, and so this is changed then in the secondary endpoints, and these are the typical safety data. Now, what came out? First study was rather low dose, 2 milligram, 4 milligram, 8 milligram, and as you can see here from the red labeled figures, that the reduction in seizure frequency was not statistically significant. And if you look here at the responder rate, it just became with 4 milligram statistically significant, and these figures show clearly statistical significance. Again, here in the responder rate, there's 17.9 placebo efficacy. And if you go now in the second study, which was done only in America, North and South America, you have these huge responder rates, and these kill the good effect on the responder rates and the median reduction in seizure frequency here. So these are barely statistical significant, and a responder rate, it's hardly statistical significant. Now, the other study going in high dosing, again, 8 and 12 milligrams, you see here clear statistical significance in the responder rate with rather low rates in placebo efficacy. Now, if you look at the reduction of seizure frequency now in comparison, you see these figures are rather similar here, and the decision was finally made that 2 milligrams is looked at as a dose which is non-effective. Minimal effective dose starts at 4 milligrams, mid-range effective dose 8 milligrams, and high effective dose 12 milligrams. This shows the rate of seizure freedom, which is a problematic figure in these studies because it's only short-term evaluation. But if you look at these figures here, they range round about 4 to 5 milligrams, which compares them with other drugs like levetiracetam in similar studies. Secondary generalized seizures are usually much more reduced than this complex partial and the others. Vital signs were not influenced. EGG, no important QTC abnormalities. Hepatobiliary and renal parameters did not change, and hematology and electrolytes were only modified if there was in the background a drug like carbamazepine or oxcarbamazepine, then you had low sodium levels. One of the problems is probably that there's a greater weight gain with perampanel versus placebo after this 19 weeks, 1.2 kilograms versus 0.4 kilograms in this case. Now, safety and tolerability in the pooled data here. The first problem occurs when you have enzyme inducers in the background like carbamazepine, oxcarbamazepine, and phenytoin, and the clearance of perampanel is critically increased. There's now one publication showing also that in very rare patients, even perampanel can increase the enzyme activity, but this is very rare. Usually there's no increase by perampanel, but having as a concomitant drug an enzyme inducer reduces the efficacy of the drug. The efficacy is maintained, but the efficacy is compared to a lower level. And since there's a linear relationship between these two, it has another effect on the seizure frequency. I don't know why this doesn't work anymore. Can somebody help me? It doesn't, neither here nor there. I can pass on. No, it's out. I think this battery is empty, or no, it doesn't work. Here, just show. Nothing happens. I think it works now. Oh no, there's no battery in there. Yeah, but it doesn't go on. No effect. Neither. Yeah, yes, this works. With the mouse it works. So I go on with the mouse, and I take this pointer. Sorry for this. So in patients taking inducer anti-epileptic drugs, increasing the dose would have an effect and is the solution of the problem. So one of the problems, again, with this drug is that all contraceptives can be reduced, but it was shown in the study and in healthy volunteers, not in the study, in healthy volunteers, that 12 milligrams are necessary, and they can induce the relevant part of oral contraceptives up to 40%. This does not work very good here. So, if somebody can push it here, if you can go on. Yeah, okay. So, here I summarize the adverse events, and if you can see here and look at the point dizziness, you see a severe increase in dizziness. This is one of the problems in everyday life with dizziness, and the dizziness occurs the earlier you take the drug in the evening. So we recommend to take the drug now just before you go to bed or before the patient goes to sleep. He takes the drug and the dizziness problem is gone. If you take it with the evening meal, most of the patients have a problem, at least in the high dosing of 12 milligram, but even a considerable number also in the 8 milligram doses. There's another aspect here. Can you go one step further? Yeah, so you can see here it's called fall. Fall means that elderly drop, and nobody has an explanation up to now why this occurs. There's a dose relationship, and in higher dose it occurs more often. We in our clinical practice did see it only once, but Jackie French told me that she has a few patients where this happens. This has to be explained one day, at least, in order to avoid this. These are just falls related to the drug intake. Weiter, further, just one more. So discontinuation, no, one back. Discontinuation rates are rather low, and this makes the drug obviously quite good for the patient to take in. I don't have to go into details, but these figures are compared with other drugs rather low. Just in the high dose phase you have relevant numbers, but discontinuation to the adverse events is only in the 12 milligram relevant compared to placebo. Further, next slide. Now I'm going now in the open label extension. Next slide, please. Open label extension, and this is here, which was learned from the pivotal trials, the placebo-controlled trials. You see there's now an escalation by 2 milligram every 2 weeks. We would recommend this to use the drug in this way, and depending on the tolerability, the patients could stop now at 8 or at 10 or 12 milligrams once daily. Next, please. Here again are the summarized data. These are the placebo responder rate, and this is the responder rate from the double-blind trial in comparison with all the data from all the patients. And now the next, please. And as you can see here, it goes up, and these are the placebo patients now taking perampanel, and this is quite equal in both phases, go up to 50%, and continuously for a longer time, whole year is shown here So the open label extension shows, comparable to other drugs, a rather good responder rate. Now next, please. 7%, and this is probably a good news, 7% of the patients were seizure-free for the full year. Next, please. Now the safety, also here you have adverse events, but if you compare this to low dose and higher dose, there's not much difference in here. The deaths are not due to the drug, and serious adverse events were comparable in all dosing groups and were low in number. Next, please. Most common adverse event for all perampanel doses. Next, please. Dizziness. Dizziness is one of the major problems the patient complains of. Somnolence, the next one, and next, please. Headache and fatigue. This is, to our opinion, in clinical use due to the time of the intake of the drug. The later you take the drug, the better these figures are. Next, please. Now, let me give the concluding remarks. There's a demonstrated efficacy in a difficult-to-treat patient type. Next, please. Once daily dosing is the big advantage. If a dose is missed, it's not a problem. 4 patients in the placebo-controlled part became seizure-free for a shorter period. 47 of the patients achieved a 50% reduction in seizure frequency at 1 year, and limited new behavioral adverse events. I come to this with our own experience later. Next, please. And only 9% discontinuation due to the adverse events. Next, please. And 7% become seizure-free in the open label extension. Next, please. Now, this resulted in TURP for perampanel indicated as adjunctive treatment to partial onset seizures with or without secondary generalized seizures in patients with epilepsy aged 12 years and older. Next, please. Now, these are the Bonn experience from this year. I just took the figures from this year's. We had in this year 235 patients under perampanel for different periods. You see here the different dosings. There were quite a few patients even on 4 milligram, others on 6 milligrams. The majority of the patients are on 8 milligrams, 10 milligrams. This is probably 2/3 of the patient group, a few on 12 milligrams, and here in a patient who has few enzyme inducers, even on 18 milligrams. This is, of course, out of label. Next, please. Now, what happened to the patients? 24 of these patients discontinued within this year. 172 are still under Fycompa on those days, and 39 were seizure-free for longer than 3 months. One has to say that these are not patients with newly diagnosed epilepsies or a short treatment time. These are long-treated patients who failed 7, 8, 9, 10 drugs. So this number is quite considerable. Next, please. Now, side effects were a bit problematic. You see here the side effects are not really related to the dosing. If you take these small things, where the patient reduced because of irritability. 24 patients discontinued Fycompa, most of them with no effect, and smallest had different kinds of side effects. And we have, next please, and we had 2 patients within this group who developed a psychosis while taking Fycompa. This was probably due to Fycompa because when it was reduced, the psychosis disappeared. Next, please. The dosing we use in Bonn is shown here. And next, please. Above is without enzyme inducers, we increase per week. Usually we stop. And this here is, next, please, with enzyme inducers. And next, please. And we make sure that the patient understands that he has to take the drug very late at night, just before he goes to bed. Now let me summarize what I tried to say. Next, please. There's a good experimental evidence that antagonizing the AMPA receptor has anticonvulsive properties and makes sense in epilepsy. Clinical studies show good efficacy with both drugs developed. I'm talking also about The other one, the seizure freedom rates in the open label extension indicate a good balance between efficacy and side effects, and the clinical experience we have in Bonn supports these impressions. Thank you very much for your patience.